Thank you. On behalf of the Universal House of Justice, my colleague Mrs. Joan Lincoln and I welcome you. This is historic. You must feel like it's historic, just being here. You know, in the Universal House of Justice and the Teaching Center, we're consulting about these conferences. Someone said, you know, we haven't used conferences as an instrument in this plan yet. So really the thinking, I think, from the World Center is that we have to regard this conference, all of these conferences, as an instrument, as instruments to advance the divine plan. And in that context, I think all of us have to think of our participation in these conferences as a service to the cause. Not just something that we're coming for fun or to learn, but really, if this is an instrument for advancing the divine plan, we have to think about our participation as a service to the cause of God. So, out of the 41, I think we've had 35 now, and 36 and 37 are starting this weekend. One here and then one in Italy. I think now, probably it must be close to 70,000 participants so far. And 4 more after this to end. You know, I was at the first conference in Zambia, and they just had maybe 2 weeks to prepare for their conference after the House of Justice announced this. And so when I was meeting with the National Spiritual Assembly in preparation the day before the conference, I said to them, almost like an apology, I said, I'm sorry that you had so little time to prepare. And they said, no, this is a blessing. I said, how's that? They said, well, you know, this conference is all about the goals that we're trying to reach by Rizwan, and we've got a longer time before Rizwan to work on them. And then they said, those people in the later conferences, they must be very capable. The House of Justice must think they can do it quickly. Friends, I want to share a short story. There was a young boy in Iran during the time of Baha'u'llah whose father was Baha'i and his mother was not Baha'i. But when he was quite young, his father died, and so he was raised in a non-Baha'i family. His mother and his brother moved in with his mother's brother, and they were raised. But they were a privileged family in that society, and they had an opportunity for education. And because this young boy, you know, education at that time meant, you know, the families that were prominent and prosperous could have a tutor for some of the boys, mostly boys that were getting education at that time. And he was one of them. This young boy was one of them. And so from an early age he had tutors, but he was a genius, just like a child prodigy. And he was progressing very fast. So he would progress faster actually than the other children. And so he would learn the subject faster, and then he would move to another tutor with another group of boys. And then he would learn that subject quickly, and he would move to another group, and so on. And when he was quite young, he found himself, he said in his memoirs, he found himself in with a group of older boys that were much bigger than him, and they used to threaten him that he had to do their homework too, or they would beat him. Okay. So then he said that he progressed even faster because he was doing his homework and the homework of all the other boys too. And so by the time he was 16 years old, he was one of a handful of people in all of Iran who knew English, because one of his tutors was teaching English. And as a result of knowing English, he received an appointment to the court of the Shah. So he had a really good job working for the king. And really a good life too, you know. He was even just a teenager, he had a good life. But he was bored. He was saying that he and his friends, most of them were the sons of the king, They just didn't, I suppose they didn't have DVDs and MP3s and things like that. So they were bored, they were always looking for something to do, and they were, one of the things that they would do, because they were all educated, they would go around Tehran to the people who were giving lectures, the theologians, philosophers, academics, and so on. And they would listen to their lectures, and then they would ridicule them and make fun of them and tear apart their arguments and so on. That was their entertainment. Okay, so this boy said that one day he heard that his older brother was going to listen to a Baha'i speaker secretly that night. And he said, oh, I'd like to go along. But you know what his motive was, right? Just to make fun of the guy. So, but he went with his brother secretly at night to one house, and he listened to this lecture about the Baha'i faith. And he said to his disappointment, there was nothing he could make fun of. And so he said, I just made fun of the food. I said, I listen all night, and this is what you feed me? But he kept going back with his, brother. And then one day he heard that his brother was Baha'i, had become Baha'i. And just like a little brother, he said, well, if you're Baha'i, I'm Baha'i too. But he didn't really know much about the Baha'i faith. And he wasn't reading much either, but somebody gave him one book, one treatise written by Abdul Baha about governance and politics and leadership. And he said, oh, this is my arena, this is what I know, this is where I live and operate, so I have to read that. So he read it, and he just fell in love with Abdul Baha. He said, I have to see Abdul Baha. Whatever it takes, I'm going to see Abdul Baha. In fact, he decided, his passion was so great that he decided not to sleep on a bed until he saw Abdul Baha. Because every morning when he woke up, he wanted to be reminded of his quest. And every night when he was going to sleep, he wanted to think about all night how he was going to see Abdul Baha. And so really when he was quite young, still a teenager, he just left his good job and started walking towards Palestine. That was very unusual in those days, and it wasn't something that a young boy would do. But he was quite bold and quite committed and passionate about seeing Abdul Baha, and he just left. But I don't know if you know the map of Iran. He didn't get very far. I think he got as far as Zanjan, and some relatives spotted him, and they shipped him back to Tehran. Okay. So, but then he kept scheming in his how he was going to achieve his heart's desire, and eventually he met some Baha'is who helped him go through the north part of Iran to Ishkabad, where the Baha'i House of Worship was built in Russia. It wasn't built at that time, but he went there, he made it there, and there was a good Baha'i community there, and they were free from persecution. And he announced that he was on his way to see Abdul Baha. I didn't know that you had to get permission to come on pilgrimage or anything, But one of the Baha'is there, a wonderful servant of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, Haji Mirza Hyder Ali Isfahani, was there in Ishkabad at that time, and he said, I'll write to Abdul Baha and ask for your pilgrimage. So eventually, permission came for him to go on pilgrimage, and he left with some older Persian men. And it took months, I think, to get there, and eventually, though, after months, he was in the Bay of Haifa waiting to go into